And Sweeney. I'm an admissions consultant with Accepted. I have over 15 years of admissions committee experience at a variety of institutions, the Lauder program with Wharton, Columbia Business School, INSEAD, and Penn State. My experience crosses full-time MBA, executive MBA programs, as well as joint degree programs with JD Law School and Master of Arts programs. I'm here to answer any of your questions. Happy to speak about admissions consulting, about our services at Accepted, how we can help you build a strong application for your applications to different programs for your MBA programs of choice. And also happy to field just general questions about MBA programs and how to put together a strong application in general. So happy to hear from all of you. If you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A and I will do my best to answer all of them. Okay, so we have a great question from Nuang, and I apologize if I don't say your name correctly. So, what makes for a successful admin at a top tier business school in the U.S.? Is it only the essay prompt, CV, GMAT, GRE, and GPA, or is there a value add factor that a candidate likely offers to an MBA cohort that's preempted by graduate adcom? So, no, I mean, I think you answered it. There's no, like, preconceived notion about the perfect applicant. Um, it's it's a strong application overall, and that's what I said a lot when I was working back in admissions. It isn't just one or two things. No one will ever be admitted or denied on, like, a GMAT or GRE or solely on your work experience or solely on an amazing letter of recommendation. You'll be admitted based on the strength of your application overall. So, whether you're applying to schools in the States or really anywhere around the world, you want to aim to have a well rounded application with a strength across all features. So, your essays, your letters of recommendation, make sure you have time to coach your recommenders, that you have plenty of time to work on your recommendations and prepare them in advance. Make sure that your resume is in what we would call like a US MBA format if you're planning on applying to schools in the US. You can Google those, there's lots of examples out there online. Of course, your essays, you want to take time to answer the question. There's so many resources online on the Accepted website as well as the institution's website. Your academics, there's only so much you can do about your undergraduate performance, but if there are any gaps in your undergraduate degree, maybe you take an outside class to show evidence of quantitative ability, for example. You want to give yourself plenty of time to take or retake the GMAT or GRE. So, well rounded application, strength across all areas, and there's no like secret. It's all about admissions committees are looking to shape a class profile. They're looking to fill a whole variety of dimensions in terms of background, work experience, personal profile, all those sorts of things. So there's no magic method. Unfortunately, it's just submitting the strongest application that you can. So hopefully that wasn't too long-winded and a little bit helpful. But thanks for your question. Okay, another question. How does the admissions committee evaluate a mature applicant versus a lesser applicant and less experienced? So it depends on the program. I mean, there's so many varieties of programs now: part-time, full-time, 2 year, full-time, 1 year, executive MBA. So if you're thinking about like a traditional 2 year full-time US program, the average years of work experience is 5. I would say the minimum is 2. And if you think about the kind of people that are admitted to the program from, let's say, early access MBA programs like Wharton has the MOLIS program or Harvard has the 2+2, it's people who are going to matriculate after 2 years of work experience post undergrad. So a lot of times I get the question like, when should I apply? And is 1 or 2 years enough experience? 2 years is kind of the minimum, I would say. Average is 5. But in my experience, we had a range from maybe 2 up to 18 years of work experience, who knows, for a full-time MBA program. It's all in how you share your profile with the admissions committee, why the MBA is right for you at that time. So I wouldn't say they necessarily look at younger applicants versus more mature. They're not going to look at age at all. It's going to be about your years of work experience, what you convey to the admissions committee about being the right time for you to do an MBA. And if you are applying, let's say, with maybe more around the 2 to 3 year mark, one of the things that's important is to show that you're a peer with applicants who are more at the 5 to 7 year mark of work experience, so that you're coming in and you're showing to the admissions committee that you're a quote unquote equal with everyone else in the classroom in terms of what you can contribute to the class discussion, to the class profile, to your study group. That's what they'll be looking for in, let's say, quote unquote, more junior applicants. If you're somebody who has like 10 years plus of work experience and you want a full time 2 year US MBA, then you should make it really clear why, with that level of experience, a full time program that's designed for candidates that generally have more on the 5 year mark of work experience is right for you. And perhaps using the supplemental essay to talk about why an executive MBA might not isn't right for you if you decide that you want to do a full-time MBA. If you're at the 10-year mark, I mean, I would encourage you to think about executive MBA programs. They're great. You continue to do your job. There's a lot of outstanding options all over the world across the US. So it really depends on what you're looking for. But the short answer to the question is, in terms of whether you're junior or more mature, it's all in how you convey your experience to the admissions committee. Okay, question from Wesley. If you could put it into a number for a candidate with 5 years of experience, what would be the weight of the experience versus GPA standardized test? So generally, I mean, when admissions committees are looking at applications, they're really looking at everything somewhat equally. But let's say if we broke it into thirds, you have your academic section, which is your undergraduate work experience, any graduate work you may have done, your GMAT, your GRE. So they're going to be looking for evidence of quantitative ability, all that sort of thing, to make sure that you can handle the rigor of a top program, the quantitative work that's required. Full stop. The second section, let's say, will be your professional experience, what you can bring to the class profile, what you want to do professionally. Will you be somebody that career services can help get a job? Are you looking to make a really dramatic transition? How you convey all of that in your experience, and then lastly, the personal side. So your personal passions, pursuits, maybe what you were involved in as an undergraduate, what you're interested in now outside of work, any volunteer experience. All of that is really going to be weighted equally, and it's how you convey that on your application. So, like having 5 years of work experience versus a strong GMAT score, it's not really looked at that way. It's really evaluated holistically. Um, so hopefully that helps a little bit, give you some perspective. I would think about it from a well-rounded approach, and not just focus on one aspect versus another. Okay, question from Vitor. What are the most common mistakes made during the application or interview process? Um, that is a great question. I would say, well, really, let's see. I mean, during the application, there's like the easy mistakes that are so easy to overlook. I was chatting with an applicant yesterday who had been denied twice from programs of choice. And when we talked through his profile, he said, "Hey, I didn't really have anybody look at my application. And I knew there was a gap quantitatively in my application, but I decided not to take like a calculus course at a community college or online to help round out. And I knew my GRE score was lower, but I didn't retake. I mean, there were some pretty glaring mistakes, right, that he could definitely work on over the next year. So the kind of obvious things, if you've written your essays, if you've done your GMAT, your GRE, if you've put everything together and let's say you're applying for round two, you're kind of at the point where you're almost ready to submit in the next month and a half or so. Have somebody look at your application, have a friend, coworker, family member, and see if the average Joe has sort of any feedback or anything they think. Hey, listen, you have some grammatical errors here. You have some, your GMAT score seems that, hey, it looks like, for example, at Wharton, the average is like 725. Your GMAT is 650. Do you want to wait a year and maybe retake it? So think about all those things that might be kind of obvious. So in the application, it's kind of those things, like making sure your dimensions across those three dimensions I mentioned, academics, personal, professional, making sure you're checking the boxes throughout there. In the interview process, honestly, it's probably two things. I would say not being sort of well versed or like prepared, fully prepared. I would practice. I would go online, record yourself, just as you would for maybe a job interview for a job you really want. You want to put your best foot forward. So come prepared to talk about why that school, why an MBA, your short term goals, your long term goals, why that program can help you achieve those goals. And the other thing I would say, in addition to just being really well prepared, is practice relaxation techniques. I know how nerves can get the best of any of us, even the most accomplished, smartest people in the room. So, practice. And I think one of the best things you can do to avoid those nerves is being well prepared. So, assuming you're well prepared, figuring out some ways to do some deep breathing ahead of the interview, making sure you're, let's say if it's in person nowadays, so many are on Zoom, but that like you're early and that you're just ready to go. But I would say work on any interview nerves. If you're somebody who has performance anxiety, it happens to all of us. And be well prepared. Practice, practice, practice. That's the things I could say about the interview. Okay. Another question. Let's see. From Palumi, how do I ensure that I'm able to stand out even with a gap year? That's a good question. I mean, if you're applying to an MBA program after a gap year and you have gained experience or maybe uh, done some additional education, I think the most important thing is explaining the gap. So all of the applications were offer the opportunity to explain any sort of questions in your application through the optional essay. So a gap year, whether it's like a voluntary gap year, maybe you got laid off, whatever the circumstances are, I would use the supplemental essay to explain the gap and think about it through the lens of like it added value. So don't just say, well, I got laid off and for a year I didn't work. So talk about like what you did in the year that you were laid off, that maybe you were obviously job searching, but you were also volunteering or working on a side project or whatever the case may be. So position it as a positive in your application, any gaps that you may have. The question from Wrong, are there specific aspects that can be put forth by accepted.com, those admitted versus non admitted for top tiers? Oh gosh, I mean, there's as I said in terms of application mistakes, one of the things we do offer for anybody who's maybe applied and hasn't been successful with an application, we do offer what we call a rejection review. And that can be really helpful just to understand some things that maybe you weren't thinking about in your essays and your overall application. Maybe there were things that you really should have conveyed on your resume and your work experience that you didn't. Maybe you went off track in your essays. Maybe your quantitative stats, your academic stats, there's a gap there. And we can help you kind of understand, so that's one way I would suggest perhaps examining how you can strengthen an application. Okay. A question from Samir. How could someone show their work experience effectively if someone owns a small family business? Yeah, that's a great question. So, a lot of applicants to business schools come from family business, even smaller ones. So, whether, if you're a consultant, a big firm, or working in a small family business, or running your own venture, regardless, it's all in how you convey it to the admissions committee. So I would say explain really clearly what you're doing, your title. When you go to have letters of recommendation, ideally they'll come from non-family members, so maybe clients, colleagues, someone else who's evaluated your work in a professional capacity. Um, it's all in sort of impact. So again, like going back to whether you're coming from maybe a more traditional background or field, you still need to show impact on your resume, in your essays. So think about where your work has made impact through your small family business. Admissions committees will be looking to see sort of the impact that you've had and what you can bring from that impact to their programs, how your accomplishments so far have and will shape your goals. So all within the frame of sort of what you can bring, just as you would with any background. Okay, question from Baki. How can a higher GMAT score can a higher GMAT score affect scholarships? To some extent, it really depends on the school. Some institutions have merit based only, and will look at your academics. They'll play a much stronger role in the evaluation of your scholarships. And I would say not just GMAT score, but your undergraduate performance, your undergraduate work, and GMAT score. And some will make have need based as well. So it really depends. But I would say take a look at the schools that you're interested in. Go on to their website under financial aid, fellowships, scholarships. Read through the criteria to gain an understanding of what they'll look for. But if it's a merit based scholarship, academics will certainly play a part. Okay, question from Ava. I read people with an MBA run nonprofit organizations well. I would like to start a nonprofit. However, I have started an e-commerce business with little to no revenue. With the admissions team, not see a goal of opening. Um, so I guess again, sort of talking more generally about impact. This is something else where you would show, regardless if you're coming from a nonprofit, you're coming from a venture. A lot of people have applied to MBA programs because they started a venture, it wasn't successful, and they want to learn from that experience and get the toolkit that an MBA can provide in order to make their next venture successful. So it's totally fine to position it as like, I'm coming from X background, let's say nonprofit. I have a venture on the side that hasn't been successful. I'd like to launch this big business longer term or pivot into something else. So an MBA can help me in these ways, and this school is the choice for these reasons. So again, all in how you sort of position that. A question from Anne, how to express your intention more effectively? Why now? Why an MBA? I plan to experience global market and long term as startup. Okay. In terms of how to express your intentions, why now, why MBA? I mean, that's something I would encourage you to sit down and basically brainstorm for yourself. What are you missing? What skills are you missing that you think an MBA can provide you with? Why is now the right time? It's really all up to you and your individual circumstances. At this time in, let's say, your career and your personal life, do you feel like the MBA is something that you're missing? What skills are you missing from the MBA? And how will that fill in to get you to your next step? So maybe you've maxed out in your career at a certain level and to get to the next step, you need an MBA. And then long term, your goals are to run a startup or to create your own venture. So it's all in how kind of you frame your goals and intention, but why now and why an MBA? It's really answering that question for yourself. And expressing that clearly to the committee. It's really kind of different for everybody. So hard to answer specifically, but welcome to reach out to us. Not just accepted, but basically all the admissions consultants out there, they offer free 30-minute consultations. So if you're not sure, sort of it's a great way to kind of utilize some free advice, frankly, and maybe consider using an admissions consultant. But if you schedule time with somebody like myself or another consultant, we can talk through like, okay, this is what I'm thinking, but I'm not sure how to position it. How can you help me? And it's a great way to brainstorm. But the first thing you need to do is really think for yourself: why an MBA? Why now? Okay, another question on a career gap: would it be better to get a job now or explain a gap decision? Should I mention that I want to spend more time to prepare for an MBA? So it, again, it depends. If you don't just want to fill a void, so taking any job to have something on your resume. It's all about kind of your intention. Like if now you're away from work and you're working on a venture, is your time better well served working on that venture versus just getting a job to have on your resume? It really depends if you on what you're doing. If you're not working at all, and you're applying to an MBA program, you'll definitely have to explain that, obviously, in the supplemental essay. So think through why are you out of work now? Explain clearly to the committee. Did you get laid off? Did you take time off to work on your venture? Really depends. Again, encourage you to maybe set up time with a consultant to talk through how best to position that. Okay, would the admissions committee see the goal of opening a nonprofit as aligned with my MBA? Absolutely. Sure, for no doubt. I mean, an MBA is great for anything. So, absolutely. Instead, should I instead focus my essays and on my e-commerce website and also add it how it can help fund my future nonprofit organization? Yeah, definitely. Not sure if I'm totally answering your question. Feel free to send me an email afterwards. But for sure, I mean, any goal with an MBA is fine. It's just how you share to the committee why an MBA makes sense to reach your goal. And in terms of your essays, focusing on e-commerce versus nonprofit, again, it really depends. I mean, if you have a short-term goal that's focused on X and your long-term goal is Y, you can convey it in that way. It's totally fine. Okay. How long does it take AdCom to review applications? So most programs, although not all, but I think most programs will have on their website. Obviously, there's like the application deadline. I would say virtually no schools review any applications until after the deadline. So there's no advantage into applying ahead of the deadline. So let's say the deadline's December 1st. In my experience, 95% of applicants would submit their applications December 1st, and everything would get reviewed after that. Internally, all schools have their own timeline, but most of them will share, for example, maybe 4 to 6 weeks after their deadline, the interview invitations will be released. So take a look at the websites, but it depends. In the school, some have rolling admissions. For those where they don't have a clear timeline on their website, you can always shoot an email over to the admissions office and say, like, "Hey, I'm applying. I understand you have a rolling admissions decision process. Could you let me know how long it would take?" In my experience, some of the executive MBA programs, they have rolling admissions, and it's usually at least 2 weeks or so until you get your initial response, and then maybe 2 weeks after that, you'll learn if you've gone to the interview. So if it's not clear, don't hesitate to email the admissions office. Okay, question from Michaela. What do you think could be the odds to get a test waiver for an applicant with a business background, 2 out of 5 years of experience in data analytics, and has a 12 in the quant section? Oh gosh. So that really depends. Some schools will have pretty explicit criteria on their website as to what they're looking for those applying with a GMAT waiver. They might say, folks who have a CPA, folks who have, let's say, I don't know, however many credits of quantitative courses on their undergraduate transcript. So it really depends. Years of work experience maybe plays in a bit, but generally speaking, my sense is that GMAT waivers, GRE waivers are for folks who clearly have very strong evidence of quantitative work through their undergraduate degree. You have an graduate degree in statistics or accounting or that sort of thing. You have, as I mentioned, a CPA. So I think it's less so, job function, work experience, and more so sort of kind of the obvious things that you can share. But again, for any school that you're interested in that offers a waiver, take a look at their website, and I would hope that they would share something with you about what they're looking for. Okay, a question. I have a strong undergraduate GPA of 3.7, but my GMAT is 680. I have already taken it a few times. I'm wondering if it's worth raising my score for M7 school. So that's great. Your GPA is really strong. If you don't, let's say you feel like you've maxed out on the GMAT, a couple things that you could do is you could consider taking the GRE if you feel you might, kind of the general rule of thumb is that the GRE, the math is not quite as hard as it is on the GMAT. So you could consider taking the GRE and see if that you get more in, let's say, the average. Ultimately, you kind of the ideal scores to be in the average range, right? Of the M7 schools, the scores that they advertise on their class profile or share on their class profile. So if you consider taking the GRE, if that's sort of like not a non-starter, maybe you'll do that as well. Um, if you have quantitative work on your transcript, then call that out in your supplemental essay. So you can say, "Hey, I recognize that my GMAT score is slightly below the average for the class. However, I took calculus, algebra, and stats in college, and I got A's in all three courses. I'm working in a field in which I have to flex my quantitative muscle. This is how I can show this through these different ways in my job. So if you're working, if you're crunching numbers at work, call that out in, I would say, your supplemental essay, your optional essay, as well as on your resume. That's a good way to sort of show any kind of quantitative rigor in your profile. So, and then the last thing I would say is actually if you don't have the courses on your undergraduate transcript, if you don't have the formal, say you're an English major, a history major, consider taking like 1 or 2 courses online or through a community college, a grade bearing course, credit earning class where you can take calculus or algebra to show hey, listen, I'm coming from a humanities background, or I was a political science major. I have really strong academics, not a ton of quantitative exposure. That's why I want an MBA. So here are some ways that I've shown, through my job, through taking an extra class online, that I can handle the rigor of the program. That's really what they'll be looking for. Okay. Another question. Would you recommend applying to specialized masters besides an MBA to top and mid-rank schools as a safer play? Can an MS improve the credibility for Indian applicant with over 10 years? It really depends. I mean, some programs, obviously, the M7 ones are highly competitive just because of the volume of applicants that apply. And a lot of applicants are obviously incredibly accomplished. So it's competitive among the pool. Some 1 year programs, master's programs, they're not necessarily having the same volume of applicants. So an MS in finance, if that sort of a program would give you what you're looking to get out of a master's degree or another kind of master's program. Generally, it depends on the school and the program, but there'll be fewer applicants. Not for all. Like NYU's MS programs probably have thousands of applicants, just like their MBA programs. So maybe you look at secondary schools. I tell people a lot. There's kind of I understand the brand. Um, Importance and awareness and how important that is for people coming from really everywhere around the world, but in particular, let's say India or other parts of the world. But I really want to share that you don't have to go to an M7 MBA program to have an incredible MBA experience, an incredibly strong and lucrative career through an MBA that's in the top 15, top 25. So um, don't eliminate schools beyond the M7. If you feel like your stats won't get you into the M7, really consider those, next 10, 15, 20 schools that are on the rankings, because they're great programs. And I can tell you from having worked at McKinsey and Company as a recruiter, we recruited from the University of Michigan and UVA and a lot of other programs. They're in the top, 10, 15, 20, 25. So lots of other great programs out there. But yeah, depending on the program, the master's program, and you can do a little research online to see how many people are applying. It could certainly be that it's quote unquote easier to get into an MS program versus an MBA. So take some time to research, but only if it's the right thing for you. Okay. A question. How can I best frame a relatively low GPA? Result of multiple unpaid internships, working with H1B to get your H1B. The approach ultimately paid off, but I'm struggling how to convey. No problem. So that's a great use of the supplemental or optional essay. So explain, what was going on. Just address it head on. The worst thing I think you can do, whether it's GPA or anything in your profile that you feel is a gap, like let's say there's a couple of F's on your transcript, whatever the case is, address it head on in the supplemental essay. Because if I was reading an application and I saw, a 2.7 GPA and not some explanation as to why someone had a 2.7 GPA, I would say like, why didn't this person address it? So talk about why. Say you were working multiple jobs, dealing with a visa process, so kind of explain it without making an excuse. And then to the extent that you can, let's say it's revealed through your GMAT, revealed through taking a class now online, show some ways that you can say, like, hey, I recognize my GPA as an undergraduate was low, but I have a 750 GMAT, or I took 3 online classes and got A's in all of them, or whatever the case may be. So kind of look to offset that. If you have something that can show that that GPA isn't reflective of your academic aptitude, that's great. So explain the situation and then try to sort of show that you'll be able to come into the class to the MBA program and be successful. Kind of a similar question. How can I explain my low GPA but a strong GRE score with a great quant section? I mean, I think that's exactly how to do it. Say I recognize my GPA is, let's say, below the average. This is what was going on. Here's evidence as to how I've done very well, uh, or I can handle the quantitative rigor of the program, the GRE, as evidenced by my GRE score. So that's a great way to show that. And then, of course, any work that you might do professionally that's quantitative in nature. Okay, question from Sophie. Since the GMAT has been replaced with the GMAT Focus, are the advertised averages actually higher than what they would be for the GMAT Focus? One program told me their average was 700 in GMAT. Yeah, that's the thing. They're going through this transition period. So there are some resources out there online that will show you like let's say what a 720, an old 725 on the traditional GMAT and how it translates to the GMAT focus. So I would think about it in that translation. So if you're taking GMAT focus, just try to focus on getting something close to the average of the old GMAT score, if that makes sense. Okay, from Ava, would a class or certificate in data analytics show the quant skills MBA programs want to see? So I would say, generally speaking, data analytics. Not everybody totally knows what's included in a data analytics course. What the committee will look for, and what, let's say, the standardized test would reveal, and what you'll have to do, especially in the core courses or the first semester of an MBA program, is you need calculus, you need algebra, you need the hard quantitative skills. So, if you have that on your transcript already, great. If you don't, a data analytics course may or may not include that. I really don't know. So, it really depends. If you don't have that hard quant background, I would look to gain it. And if you don't have it, but let's say you have really strong GMAT or GRE score, then that kind of takes care of it. So, I would say you generally want a quantitative course that really calls out that it's quantitative versus something that someone would have to like interpret. If you did get a lot of quantitative or math in your data analytics, add that to your resume, add that to the supplemental essay to clarify for the admissions committee. Okay, some more questions. What schools would you recommend that have the potential of giving a significant scholarship? It really depends. I mean, you could take a look at the class profiles, websites, online to see how many people get a scholarship. Some schools share that, some don't. It's a hard to say. Yeah, I mean, I wish I could tell somebody, oh, this school gives out full funding to everybody. There's some programs that have things like that. Most of them, unfortunately, aren't MBA programs, but yeah, I would say you have to do some research online and see what programs you maybe would be a competitive applicant, and see if you can and do a little research on what their average financial aid award is, for example. Question from Rabin: What are the quantitative skills meant to outcome? So, I mean, the quantitative skills, as I've talked a little bit about, are important because of the math that's required in the core part of the program, core curriculum, which most 2-year or even some 1-year MBA programs will require. So that's why it's so important, so that when you come into the program, you can handle the coursework. When you're working your study groups, when you're doing really the math that's required as part of the MBA, that you'll be in good shape. The core curriculum at Wharton, for example, is accounting, stats, all those courses. So having that quantitative rigor in your application is important, so they know, oh, this person will come in and will be successful. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm gonna pass over the scholarship questions. It's just it really depends on the school and what they're looking for. Again, merit scholarships, having a outstanding application with very strong academics, need-based. Some schools have a specific application they're looking for. So encourage you to take a look online at their websites. Okay, a question from Anne. My GPA is 3.3, and I did not do well in my first year quant courses, but well in the rest of the program and got a scholarship. Should I point that out or just explain the reason? Yeah, it depends. I mean, it's sort of what you think would be the best way to convey that. That might be something also, like, have a friend, coworker, if you know somebody in your network who's gotten an MBA, reach out to an admissions consultant and say, hey, listen, how should I position this? The fact that your overall GPA, 3.3 isn't anything, to cry about. It's a totally fine GPA. So maybe, I always tell people, you don't want to over explain things. You don't want to explain so much that it sounds like you're sort of overdoing it. Keeping it short, simple. My GPA was low the first year because of XYZ. Maybe I changed majors. I continued to do well. But if you show that you have a quantitative weakness, you want to think about ways that you can improve that, again, through the GMAT or GRE, through an outside quant course, that sort of thing, through your work. How about would a pre-MBA program help me? Like Harvard, a Forte Foundation, do you think they add considerable more to your CV or giving us a chance of acceptance? So it really depends. I mean, I would say in terms of chance of acceptance, some schools are highly partnered with Forte Foundation, Forte Organization for Women. So they're collaborators. I wouldn't say they're necessarily makes it easier to get in. I do think it benefits you in terms of being well prepared for the actual MBA program. Does it make you more competitive? Maybe. But it's really going to kind of jumpstart you so that when you join an MBA program, you'll be able to hit the ground running. So it's really if you feel like it would benefit you versus adding something to your application. I would say if I had two applications and one had the Harvard pre-MBA program and one didn't, it wouldn't make a huge difference if they were the same. The other things will stick out more, like your GMAT, GPA, that sort of thing. So it's really only if you feel like it would help you prepare for an MBA program. Don't let me dissuade you from taking them. And Forte is an incredible organization. So encourage you to do it because I think it does help people, but really again for your own benefit. Um, so I have a question about accounting. Accounting is a good example. Stats, calculus. You know, you want to think about rigor. I think that's a good way to think about it. So it really depends. It's not like there's one or two or three specific courses. Calculus is a good example. Accounting might be fine. So it really depends on your specific circumstances. Okay, question from Nathan. My average GMAT is below the school's average. However, speaking to students at the school, it seems I seem to be much more accomplished in other areas. Do you think it's worth applying in round two or wait for better score in round three? So, great question. Unless you have extenuating circumstances, and by extenuating, I mean like you're deployed on a military mission overseas or you've had a health scare or something really extenuating, definitely round 3 is not a choice for most applicants. At that point, most MBA programs have filled their classes. Now it depends. Some schools have like 4 rounds. So let's say the final round of applications for most MBA programs. I would not wait until that round. This year I think is like historic high levels of application. So round 2 or next year, I would say. If your GMAT is below the average, if it's wildly below the average, okay, maybe wait and work on that for the next 6 months and reapply for round 1 next year. If you don't feel like you can improve your score and everything else about your application is really strong, including your work experience, no reason not to apply in round 2. Just think through ways in your application that you can call out your quantitative abilities. Question from Caesar: Would courses like MBA Math help show quant readiness? Sure, I think, something like that is probably, again, more beneficial to you as opposed to the admissions committee showing evidence to the admissions committee. Grades on a transcript, supplemental grades, GMAT, GRE, quant score, and quantitative work in your job. Those will be the most sort of, evidence that you can show. An MBA Math, I mean, you could certainly include that, and if somebody's wondering about your, quantitative ability as they review your application, they might say, "Oh, okay, he's doing MBA Math, that's good," but they'll still be looking for that evidence that you can handle the coursework. For round 2 applications, are there schools that can get admission to offer full funding? So I would do some research online and see, are there MBA programs out there that offer full funding? Off the top of my head, unfortunately, not aware of a lot of them. Some schools absolutely offer some full funding scholarships, but it depends on the applicant, on the circumstances. Though there could be some programs that offer full fellowships to people from a certain country, from a certain background. So it really depends on the school. But you'd have to sort of do a little research and see what schools might be a fit for you. Is round 2 application late to get a start full funding from Ohio State, University of Georgia? Um, yeah, I mean, everything, it's your whole application. I think round 2 in general is fine. It seems like your GRE score is good. I think I would use the supplemental essay to talk about your application. Sorry, your GPA. And your chances, some of the smaller programs, the MBA programs at like the state level, Ohio State, University of Georgia are good examples. Their admissions team might be willing to talk with you one on one and give you some insight into your profile and your application because they're not dealing with the volume of applicants that like Harvard or Wharton and Stanford are. They might have the ability to do that. So I would reach out directly to the admissions office and see if you can get some feedback. Question from Ronak, I'm sorry. Does the GR really have the same value for business schools as GMAT? Absolutely. At this point, I would say half of the folks are taking GRE in lieu of GMAT. So I wouldn't worry. It's honestly whatever one you think you can do better on as far as what to take. Um, A question from Cigar, I guess you're asking about verbal ability? I'm not sure. Let me know if you can clarify your question, happy to answer it. From Diva, what questions specifically asked to alumni to improve our application? I mean, that's again something I think that would benefit you more so than maybe your application. Maybe you would get some insights, but I would encourage you to ask them like, if they could do something different from their MBA program, what would they do differently? What resources did they use that they felt really helped? Were there certain classes, faculty members? Um, do they, again, wish they had done something differently? Did they handle their time well? What were their priorities? Were they focused more on the student experience, on getting a job, on the academics, networking? So, but I think a great question to ask anybody is like, if you could go back and do something differently, what would it be? And that will give you some insight into the application, but into how you might experience an MBA for yourself. So yeah, something to think about. Sometimes in conversations with current students and alumni, thinking about the classes and faculty, that can be really informative, like, "Oh, I didn't realize that was a class at Wharton, so now I'm really excited," and that's something you can incorporate into your application. Okay, we'll take maybe 1 or 2 other questions, and then we'll have to wrap up. We're just about um, 3 minutes out, so I'll try to answer as many questions. I'll also put my email here, kara@accepted.com, and you can go on our website as well, accepted.com, for admission support. And thanks, to our moderator for putting it in the, chat as well. Um, Based on my experience, overrepresented male, chances of a full-time or part-time. I mean, part-time programs, generally speaking, are easier to get into for anybody, just because they're not looking to fill a cohort or put together a class profile. They have students coming in and out all the time, graduating, taking classes, obviously here and there. So generally speaking, part-time programs aren't quite as competitive. Okay, and I guess our final question, or maybe I have time for one more. This year has seen an unprecedented rise in GMAT apps. Do you think that will be the case next year? It really depends. I mean, a lot is changing, especially in the US. So we'll see what the next year brings, the next couple of years in terms of the job market. What we see generally is the job market is tight or folks are out of work, then the application volume to MBA programs goes up. So if in the next year or two we see there a great need for jobs and people are staying in their jobs, then we'll see applicant volume go down. So it's hard to predict, but it tends to be the inverse of the job market. Honest, do you have any insight with NBYU? That's a great question. I don't, but you're welcome to reach out to me, and I'll see if any of my colleagues have experience with BYU. I know some folks who have gone to their undergraduate programs and loved them. So happy to see if we can share some more with you. If you're welcome to reach out to me. Okay, can a high TOEFL score compensate for a low verbal GMAT score? Not necessarily. TOEFL is really just looking at your English language abilities. They won't look at TOEFL within the context of your GMAT. How can I get an application fee for waiver for school like University of Georgia, which has a high cost, and they don't waive? That's interesting because most programs will offer an application waiver for folks who may be coming from, let's say their lower socioeconomic background or a lower paying job. So again, reach out to the admissions office and see if there's exceptions. But most schools will offer an application fee waiver. It really depends. If they don't, unfortunately, out of luck there. Okay, everybody, I think we have to wrap up. I hope that was helpful. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to us at accepted.com if you'd like some help with your MBA application. My name is Kara. It was great talking to all of you. And I wish you the best of luck, whether you apply this year or in the future. Take care.